I knew something was wrong the moment the first call cut off. It wasn't a dropped signal or a weak connection. It was a clean, sharp rejection. The kind you only get when someone presses decline without a second thought. I stared at my phone for a long second, waiting for the screen to light up again, waiting for any sign my daughter still cared enough to call back. Nothing came. So I tried again. And again. Each attempt ended the same way, with that cold silence swallowing the little hope I had left. By the fourth try, my hands were shaking. I wasn't angry yet, not then. I was confused, hurt, a little scared. I told myself she might be busy, or driving, or tied up with something important. The mind reaches for excuses when the truth feels too painful. But then her final message came through, short and sharp, cutting through every excuse I tried to build. "Stop calling. I'm done explaining myself." Those words didn't sound like her. Not the girl I raised. Not the woman who once called me every Sunday just to tell me she bought new curtains or found a recipe I might like. This felt like someone else had typed it for her. Someone who wanted distance between us. Someone who benefited from pulling her away. I felt a pressure in my chest I couldn't name. Like the ground under me shifted and I couldn't find a place to stand. I tried to remember when things started changing. It wasn't sudden. It was little things. Shorter calls, rushed words, quiet sighs when I asked how she was. She used to laugh about her busy days. Now she spoke like every conversation with me was a burden she wasn't strong enough to carry. I asked if someone was pressuring her, and she brushed it off with a stiff, "I'm just tired." But tired daughters don't block their fathers. Tired daughters don't send messages that sound like warnings. That night, I walked through my living room trying to make sense of the shift. The house felt different, heavier, as if the air carried something I was supposed to notice. When I reached my desk, an envelope lay there that hadn't been there that morning. No return address, no note, just my name typed on the front. Inside was a copy of a legal notice. Her name on the line where it said power of attorney, a line I never signed, and terms that made my throat close. It said she was rescinding all informal agreements and separating financial responsibilities. It might as well have said, "You're on your own now." I read the document twice, tracing each word with shaking fingers, trying to understand how far this distance went. My own daughter filing changes behind my back. My own daughter planning to cut me loose, as if I were some stranger who had overstayed his welcome. A cold dread settled in me like a shadow I couldn't step out of. Someone had turned her heart against me, and I didn't yet know why. Then, while I sat there trying to hold myself together, I remembered the voicemail I recorded months ago. I kept it because something in her voice back then didn't feel right, an edge I couldn't explain. I didn't know it would matter someday. But I saved it anyway, like a man storing rain before the drought. Tonight, staring at that legal paper, I understood why. I hit play on that recording because I knew this day would come. What would you do if your own child refused to hear your voice? I didn't lose my daughter in one night. It happened in inches, in tones, in pauses that stretched too long. Looking back now, I can see every warning sign I ignored. At the time, I told myself families go through quiet seasons, that work stress changes people, that distance doesn't always mean danger. But a parent knows when something in their child's voice no longer belongs to them. That shift started months before she stopped taking my calls, and I felt it like a slow tightening in my chest. Our conversations used to drift for half an hour, sometimes longer. She would talk about work frustrations, weekend plans, little joys from her day. Then the calls shortened, first to 10 minutes, then to 5, then to the kind of 2-minute exchange you have with someone waiting at the door to leave. Her tone cooled in ways she didn't seem to notice. She sounded distracted, impatient, as if she had somewhere else to be, or someone listening in the background who didn't like her speaking to me for too long. I remember the first time I heard a voice behind her, muffled but sharp. She told me it was nobody, just a friend passing by. But the way she straightened her tone, the way her voice tightened, told me she wasn't alone, and whoever stood near her had an opinion about our conversation. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized the tone. Someone evaluating, someone judging. After that, she changed faster. She questioned small choices I made, hinted that I needed to update how I see the world, a phrase she never used before. It didn't sound like her beliefs. It sounded borrowed. Then came her sudden interest in my finances, something she never cared about before. She started asking casual questions, how much I still kept in savings, whether the house was fully paid off, whether I had updated the beneficiary forms on my accounts. She tried to sound casual, even clumsy, as if these were just things grown children should know as their parents age. But the timing felt wrong. The pattern felt wrong. She never once asked those things when we were close. I remember the evening she asked if I needed help managing my bills. She framed it as concern, but her eyes looked different that day, more focused on my desk than on me. When I said I was fine, she pressed harder, insisting she could simplify everything if I just let her handle the paperwork. That was the first moment I felt something colder behind her words, something that didn't feel like my daughter's spirit or care. It felt guided, rehearsed, as if someone had told her what to say. A week later, she brought me a form she said her friend recommended, something about proving financial support or confirming someone as a trusted contact. She didn't explain why she needed it. She only said, "It's normal, Dad. Everyone does this now." I told her I needed time to read it. The look she gave me then still haunts me. Not angry, not sad, just calculating. As if my hesitation disrupted a plan she wasn't supposed to reveal. That was the night I started keeping notes. Not because I expected betrayal, but because I felt confused and ashamed for even thinking something might be wrong. I wrote down what she said, the questions she asked, the mood she carried when she left. A few weeks later, I began recording certain calls, not many, just enough to help me understand the tone shifts, the gaps, the pressure behind her words. I told myself it was for my memory, for clarity as I got older. But deep down, I feared I might one day need proof of what I was hearing. As the months passed, the distance grew heavier. Her messages felt scripted, her visits grew short, and each time she walked out the door, I felt a piece of her slip further away, like someone else was pulling her by the shoulder. The worst part wasn't the change itself. It was knowing she couldn't see it happening. Have you ever felt someone was turning your own child against you? I didn't want to believe anything was wrong until the evidence sat in my hands, plain as day, with my name printed on forms I had never touched. It started one quiet morning when I checked the mail like I always did. Among the usual envelopes was a thick packet from an insurance company I hadn't contacted in years. At first, I assumed it was a policy update or some advertisement. But when I opened it, my stomach tightened. Inside were beneficiary change forms, stamped, processed, and waiting for my signature. Except someone had already tried to sign for me. The signature wasn't mine. It didn't even look close. Yet my daughter's name was suddenly listed as primary beneficiary, and not in the careful way families plan together. It It felt rushed, sneaky, slipped into a stack with the hope I wouldn't notice. I told myself it had to be a mistake, maybe a clerical error. But 2 days later, I received an email alert from my bank, something about a request to update account access. When I clicked through, I saw my daughter's partner listed on the request, a man I had barely spoken to twice. The bank asked me to confirm the shared access arrangement. I stared at the screen so long my eyes blurred. I knew then that this wasn't a mistake. Someone was trying to get into my accounts, and they weren't even hiding it well. I went to the bank in person because I needed to hear a real voice explain how this happened. The representative, a woman old enough to recognize the signs, glanced at the paperwork and then at me with a look I'll never forget. It was the look people give when they know something bad is happening but want to break it gently. She asked if I had recently signed anything giving permission for shared access. I told her no. She asked if anyone had pressured me to change permissions. I shook my head. Then she lowered her voice and said, "Sir, this pattern is common when someone is trying to gain control of an elder's finances. You need to be careful." Those words hit harder than any rejection, any cold message my daughter had sent. I walked out of that bank with my chest burning, carrying a stack of printouts showing attempts to access my accounts, draft forms for transferring property, even a half-completed request for power of attorney changes. I held them like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. I called my daughter that evening, still hoping for some reasonable explanation. She answered with that same detached tone, as if I'd interrupted something important. When I asked her about the forms, she didn't react with surprise or concern. She sighed, long, irritated, and said, "Dad, you're overthinking. It's just planning for the future. Everyone does it. But everyone doesn't forge signatures. Everyone doesn't let their partner request access to accounts belonging to someone they barely know. Everyone doesn't respond to questions about property transfers with chill in their voice." I asked her directly if her partner had encouraged any of this. She hesitated. Not long, but long enough. Then she said, "He's just trying to help. He understands things better than you do." The words stung because they weren't hers. I recognized the echo of someone else's influence, someone who saw me not as a father, but as a financial opportunity. Our conversation ended with her saying, "Just trust us," in a tone so empty it made my heart drop. There was no warmth, no reassurance, no trace of the girl I raised. That was the moment anger quietly replaced confusion. Not loud anger, but the kind that steals a man's spine. I realized I had to protect myself, not because I wanted to doubt her, but because not protecting myself would be foolish. I gathered every document, every email, every alert. I made copies and stored them safely. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing for the truth. What would you do if your own child tried to rewrite your life on paper? I never thought my own child would shame me where the whole world could see it. But that day, the day she pushed me out of her life in the most public way possible, something inside me cracked in a way I can't fully describe. It didn't begin with a fight. It didn't begin with a harsh conversation. It began with a simple notification on my phone, a tag from someone I barely knew, asking if I was okay after what my daughter said. I didn't understand at first. I clicked the link, expecting some misunderstanding. What I saw instead stopped my breath cold. She had posted online about cutting ties with toxic family and setting boundaries with people who drain her. Her words weren't vague. They weren't subtle. She described an older relative who needed to get out of her personal and financial life. She said she was tired of babysitting grown adults, and that some people shouldn't handle their own decisions anymore. The comments underneath told the rest of the story. People congratulated her for being strong. Her partner chimed in, saying she was finally taking control and protecting her future from people who refused to move on. He said those words with pride, as if destroying a family bond was an achievement. I sat there, reading every line, every comment, feeling something in me fold. She didn't use my name, but everyone close to our lives knew exactly who she meant. A friend from church called me gently, asking if I wanted to talk. A neighbor stopped by that evening, standing awkwardly at my doorway, unsure whether to offer comfort or avoid the subject altogether. Gossip travels faster than truth, and all of it pointed to the same painful reality. My daughter had decided the world should see me as a burden. A few days later, I saw her at a small gathering for a mutual acquaintance's birthday. I hadn't planned to go, but it was a commitment I couldn't gracefully skip without raising questions. When she walked in with her partner, her eyes skimmed past me like I was a stranger taking up space. I approached her gently, asking if we could talk. She didn't even lower her voice when she said, "Not here. I already made my point." People heard. They turned to look. Her partner stood by with a smug expression, one hand on her shoulder like he owned every step she took. When I tried again, she crossed her arms and said, "Dad, please stop embarrassing yourself. We're moving forward without all the old baggage." The word baggage echoed in my head, stinging in a way no physical blow could. I felt anger rise, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that hardens. This wasn't my daughter speaking. This was someone molded by manipulation, coached by someone who benefited from her coldness. And in that moment, surrounded by people pretending not to stare, I realized she no longer saw me as her father. She saw me as a barrier, an obstacle to be pushed aside so someone else could step into the space where trust and family once lived. When I stepped away, trying to breathe, my mind drifted to the tape again, the one she didn't know existed. I hadn't planned on using it. I hadn't ever wanted it to matter. But the way her partner watched me that afternoon, the confidence in his smirk, told me they weren't done. Whatever they were planning went deeper than account access or forged paperwork. There was a larger move coming, something that required me to be out of the way completely. That was the day heartbreak gave way to clarity. If I didn't uncover the full truth and protect myself, no one would. And whatever was on that tape, whatever truth it held, might be the only thing standing between me and the disaster they were quietly building. Would you walk away? Or fight to protect yourself? I didn't understand how deep the betrayal ran until I forced myself to look at everything they had tried to hide. What I found was worse than fraud. It was an attempt to take my life while I was still living in it. On paper, in records, in quiet conversations spoken behind closed doors. The first real proof came on a Tuesday morning when I stopped by my bank again to request copies of every recent inquiry on my accounts. I expected one or two suspicious forms. Instead, the representative handed me a folder almost an inch thick. Inside were requests to add my daughter's partner as a financial manager, drafts of agreements giving them joint authority, and even a bold attempt to move one of my certificates of deposit into an account I had never heard of. Some of the documents carried a scrawled version of my signature. The stroke pattern wasn't mine. The tilt was wrong. Even the spelling of my name looked uncertain, as if the person forging it wasn't fully confident. Seeing that sloppy attempt made something cold settle under my ribs. Someone hadn't just hoped I'd sign. Someone hoped I wouldn't notice. That same afternoon, I received a call from my doctor's office. They told me my daughter had requested a capacity evaluation for me, a test normally used when families worry an elder can't manage their decisions anymore. I had never agreed to it. I hadn't even heard her mention it. And when the nurse said my daughter provided recent concerns about cognitive decline, I had to sit down. They had tried to paint me as confused, forgetful, unfit to manage my own life. It wasn't incompetence they wanted. It was control. That was the moment horror replaced suspicion. Not fear for my money, fear for my rights, my voice, my autonomy. If they succeeded, my entire life could be shifted into their hands with a single legal ruling. My home, my decisions, even my medical care could be redirected into a future I wanted no part of. I took everything I found, every form, every email, every alert, and went straight to a lawyer who specialized in elder protection. The moment he scanned the documents, his eyebrows tightened. He pointed out inconsistencies instantly, mismatched dates, signatures signed with 2 different pens, requests filed outside normal procedure. When he reached the capacity evaluation note, he leaned back and said, "This is not just concerning, this is deliberate." He told me bluntly that these patterns often appear in cases of financial exploitation or attempts to seize control of an elder's estate. He said the forged signatures alone were grounds for a criminal investigation. Hearing that word, criminal, made my throat tighten. I never wanted to think of my daughter in those terms. But the evidence didn't care about my feelings. It was there, solid and cold on the table between us. The lawyer asked if I had any proof of coercion or manipulation. That's when I mentioned the tape, the recording I'd saved months ago. I didn't tell him the contents. I only said I recorded it because something in her voice had scared me. Something had told me she wasn't acting alone. Something had told me to prepare. He nodded slowly and said, "Keep it safe. It may matter more than you realize." Walking out of that office, I felt a shift inside me. Not rage, resolve. The kind that grows when a man realizes the people meant to love him have placed their future above his survival. They had tried to steal my life before I was gone, using paperwork as a weapon and lies as a foundation. I knew then I couldn't confront them with emotion. They had already twisted my concern into weakness. What I needed was a legal fight, one grounded in truth and proof. And I had both. What would you do if someone tried to steal your life before you were gone? I expected the legal process to move slowly. But once my lawyer filed the protective orders and submitted the evidence, the system moved with a force I wasn't prepared for. It started with a formal notice delivered to my daughter's residence, informing her that all attempts to alter my power of attorney, change my beneficiaries, or claim shared access to my accounts were now under investigation. My lawyer also filed a request to freeze any pending financial actions linked to my name. For the first time in months, I felt a small breath of safety. But safety is not peace. Not when the people you love are the ones creating the danger. 2 days later, the police made contact. They didn't storm in or act theatrical. They did something far more painful. They treated the case with calm seriousness. They had copies of the documents with the forged signatures. They had statements from the bank and insurance company. They had the timeline neatly laid out, too neat to be brushed aside as confusion or accidental paperwork. They asked my daughter and her partner to come in for questioning. She called me the moment she saw the officers at her door. Her voice trembled between anger and fear. "Dad, what did you do? Why are the police here? This is insane." She tried to twist her words into innocence, but the panic in her tone betrayed her. I told her I hadn't lied about anything. I told her the documents spoke for themselves. She didn't respond with concern for me. She responded with fury at being exposed. "You're ruining my life because you don't understand what we were trying to do." Her partner grabbed the phone then, his voice sharper, colder. "You didn't have to escalate this. We were only trying to streamline things. Older people need support." His words dripped with condescension, as if I were a child misunderstanding simple instructions. But when the police asked him to answer questions separately from my daughter, I could hear his tone crack. He wasn't confident anymore. He wasn't in control. Under pressure, people reveal who they truly are, and he revealed fear. At the station, my daughter sat rigid, her face pale as officers placed the forged documents in front of her. She insisted she had never seen them. She pointed at me through the glass window, telling investigators I was confused and misremembering things. But when they showed her the matching handwriting across several forms, her excuses wavered. She looked to her partner for help, but he avoided her eyes. When they questioned him, he tried to control the narrative, claiming he only acted to protect the family, that I had asked for help, that the mistakes were clerical. But every sentence cracked under the weight of evidence. The officers treated the case with a gravity that broke something inside me. They didn't see a family disagreement. They saw attempted fraud, exploitation, and coercion. They spoke about felony-level forgery and possible charges for financial abuse of an elder. Hearing those words, spoken about my own child, felt like standing in a room where every sound echoed against my ribs. From behind the observation window, I watched her expression shift from rage to disbelief to something hollow. She looked at me once, eyes wide, searching for the man who always forgave her, always softened the truth. But I couldn't look away from the evidence. Protecting myself didn't make me cruel. It made me responsible. When my lawyer submitted the tape, the recording I made long before any of this exploded, the officers listened closely. My daughter's voice on that tape held early traces of the manipulation, the coached reasoning, the subtle pressure. It wasn't the whole story, but it was enough to confirm a pattern they already suspected. I felt sorrow more than triumph. This wasn't justice I wanted, it was justice I needed. The law was confronting them because I no longer could. Should the law be harsher toward those who manipulate elders? I didn't want the tape played. Even as my lawyer prepared it, even as the officers noted its importance, a part of me wished the truth could be proven some other way, some gentler way. But gentleness had been stripped from this situation long before I walked into that mediation room. What remained was the truth, and the truth deserved a voice louder than mine. We sat around a long table, my lawyer beside me, the investigators across from us, and my daughter and her partner at the far end looking smaller than I had ever seen them. She wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared forward, jaw tight, as if bracing for a storm he'd hoped would pass without touching him. The room was quiet, except for the hum of a recorder being set up. The mediator asked if all parties understood that the recording was being entered as evidence. Everyone nodded. I felt my pulse in my throat. My lawyer pressed play. Her voice came first, my daughter's. Not the soft tone I remembered from years ago, but the sharp, clipped version she developed after meeting him. The conversation had been recorded during a visit months before everything erupted. I had turned on the recorder because something in her tone frightened me that day, something I couldn't name at the time. And now, hearing it in that room, I realized it wasn't fear of losing her. It was fear of losing myself at her hands. On the tape, she said she was done waiting and that he's getting older. This has to be handled before he drifts. She talked about my accounts like they were unfinished chores. She mentioned my house as if it were a prize waiting to be claimed. When she said, "He won't push back if we make it sound like we're helping," I had to close my eyes. I remembered that moment vividly, the way she had smiled at me afterward, pretending everything was normal. Then his voice entered, firm and calculated. He told her to tighten the pressure and keep the story consistent. He warned her not to let me talk to anyone who might change his mind. He even laughed once, quiet, confident, when she asked whether forging a signature was too risky. "He won't catch it," he said. "And even if he does, no one will believe him over us." When that line played, the room shifted. Investigators stiffened. The mediator's expression darkened into something close to disgust. One of the officers dropped his pen. Even my lawyer, who had already heard the recording, leaned forward as if the weight of those words had deepened. My daughter's reaction was immediate. She shook her head, eyes wide, whispering, "No, no, that's not what it sounds like." But her voice broke on the second denial. She clutched her partner's arm, searching for support, but he pulled away slightly, instinctively distancing himself now that the truth was carved into sound. He tried to claim the recording was altered. The investigator shut that down quickly. The metadata had been verified, and the recording was legally admissible because I had been a participant in the conversation. There was no loophole for him to escape through. My daughter's face collapsed as the tape continued. Not into guilt, at least not at first, but into panic. She covered her mouth when she heard herself talk about my mental state, claiming I was slipping and easier to guide lately. Her words carried a chill I had ignored for too long. When the recording ended, silence spread across the table like a cold draft. The mediator finally spoke, stating plainly that the evidence demonstrated intent. Clear, coordinated intent to exploit, manipulate, and defraud me. Legal penalties would move forward. Protective rulings would remain in place. Criminal charges were now justified and likely. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel victory. What washed over me instead was sorrow. Deep, settled sorrow for the daughter I raised and the person she had become under someone else's influence. But beneath that sadness was quiet strength. The truth had spoken for me. I had been heard. Does hearing the truth change the punishment someone deserves? I've had many long nights to sit with what happened, and I've learned that the hardest part of aging isn't the body slowing down. It's learning who will still honor the years you gave them. When your own child turns away, it forces you to face questions you never imagined asking. I raised my daughter with everything I had. I taught her how to walk, how to speak, how to steady her voice when life frightened her. I never pictured a future where I would need the law to protect me from her hands. But life doesn't wait for our comfort. It reveals truth whether we're ready or not. I won't pretend the outcome gave me peace. What it gave me was clarity, an understanding of where love ends and self-respect begins. I can accept that she may never come back. I can accept that she may tell herself stories where I'm the villain, where she was justified, where her partner led her astray and she simply followed. What I cannot accept is the belief that forgiveness is automatic, or that blood alone should excuse betrayal. Some wounds cut too deep to cover with the word family. People tell me I should hope for reconciliation someday, that a father's heart should stay open no matter how much harm was done. But hope without boundaries is just a door left unlocked for danger to enter again. I'm not closing my heart to punish her. I'm closing it to protect what little peace I have left. She made her choices, and I'm finally learning that I'm allowed to make mine. The law gave me the boundaries she refused to respect. My accounts are frozen from her access. My assets are protected. My medical decisions cannot be touched without my consent. These protections are not weapons. They are shields. Barriers built not from anger, but necessity. Justice in my case was never about revenge. It was about survival, dignity, and making sure no one could rewrite the rest of my life on paper. And there is something she never understood about the tape. Something no one in that room suspected until the end. Yes, it held the proof of what she and her partner had planned. Yes, it exposed their intent, their words, their quiet calculations. But that wasn't all it carried. After the conversation I recorded, I kept speaking for a moment longer, long after she walked out the door. I said the things a father says when he knows he may lose his child to a kind of darkness he cannot reach. On that tape, after her voice faded, mine remained. I told her I loved her. I told her I hoped she would open her eyes before someone ruined her future. I told her I feared the day she'd no longer see me as a person, but as an obstacle. And I told her, quietly, honestly, that if she ever crossed the line between worry and harm, the next time she heard my voice would not be on a phone call, but in a room where the truth had to be faced. Those were my last words to her, spoken before I even knew they'd be used as evidence. When the tape finished playing in that office, she heard them, not in private, not in comfort, but in the place where her choices had delivered her. It was the last voice she'll hear from me for as long as she continues down this path. That wasn't vengeance. That was acceptance. As I look at the years ahead, I no longer measure them by who stands beside me. I measure them by the dignity I refuse to lose. Justice didn't heal the wound, but it closed it. And sometimes, that's the only kind of closure life offers. Should a parent forgive a child who only hears their voice again in a lawyer's office?